Mercy was easy to praise when bellies were full, borders were quiet, and power felt secure. In lean seasons, it became the first virtue dragged to the altar. Ilara had learned that lesson long before chains touched her skin. Pacts called cruelty duty, called ownership order, called fear tradition, and slept better for the new names. Yet even now, crossing into the Moonfall conclave with iron biting her wrists, she could not stop searching faces for one person who might remember that wolves were meant to protect what was smaller than themselves. The search hurt more than the shackles, because every time she looked up, someone looked away. The sacred arena rose from black stone like a broken crown, tier upon tier of carved seats circling a central dais dusted with pale ash. 100 alpha standards hung from spear poles around the ring, each banner stitched with moon sigils, claw marks, or old war crests. Torches spat resin and smoke into the descending afternoon, and the smell of pine pitch mixed with sweat, steel, and wet wool until breathing felt like swallowing rough cloth. Ilara's ankles trembled from the climb up the processional steps. She had not eaten since dawn, when a handler had thrown her a heel of ceremonial bread and laughed when she caught it like a starving stray. "Keep your head down," growled Rurik, the Dark Hollow envoy marching beside her. He wore his pack badge over his heart and would not meet her gaze. "You are tribute, not a daughter today." She swallowed against a dry throat. "I was never your daughter." His jaw tightened. "Then do not make me regret bringing you alive." The chain between her wrists jerked hard enough to reopen the skin where old bruises had yellowed and new cuts burned raw. She bit the inside of her cheek to keep from making sound. Around them, nobles leaned forward in carved seats, their fur collars immaculate, their rings glinting, their expressions avid. There was appetite in the air, not hunger for food, but for leverage, heirs, and dominance stamped into flesh. At the center of the arena stood the bidding platform, a raised circle of moonstone with a narrow drain channel carved along its edge, ceremonial and clean. Too clean. Ilara understood, with sick precision, how often stone had been washed for rites called lawful. The herald, a gray-bearded elder robed in silver thread, struck his staff once. By treaty of border peace between 15 allied territories, the Dark Hollow offering is presented. Ilara Dark Hollow, unbonded female of proven fertility line, surrendered in exchange for defense quotas and winter grain rights. A murmur passed through the seats like wind through dry leaves. Proven fertility line. They had measured her cycle, tracked her blood, and discussed her body in rooms where she served wine and pretended not to hear. Rurik stepped forward to address the conclave. "Dark Hollow submits her without contest. We request honorable placement under a dominant house with adequate security and bloodline oversight." Ilara lifted her head despite him. "Say the truth. You sold me because your stores failed." His hand flashed, striking her cheek with a crack that snapped across the arena. Gasps rose, then settled into silence. "Silence your tribute," he said through his teeth. Heat spread along her skin where he hit her, but colder than the pain was the realization that no one condemned him. A few alphas watched with mild irritation, as if poor handling had bruised merchandise before auction. One of them, broad-shouldered and scarred, called down from the third tier, "If she snaps, muzzles cost extra." Laughter answered him. By the hour before sunset, the ritual sequence had begun. One by one, designated alphas approached the dais to scent her throat, inspect her wrists, and speak claims that sounded like legal clauses with teeth. Some touched her chin, forcing her face up. One pressed his thumb against the hollow at the base of her neck and asked whether she screamed. Another pinched the muscle of her arm and announced she would breed strong if fed. The herald recorded every word on a wax tablet while the crowd discussed dowries and patrol routes as though Ilara were a disputed pasture. She retreated inward because there was nowhere else to retreat. If I disappear inside myself, they only own what is left standing here. If I keep one thought clean, one memory untouched, I am not fully theirs. She held onto a single image, a stream behind the old dark hollow granary where abandoned pups used to hide in spring, their paws too big, their tails muddy, their ears folded wrong. She had fed them scraps when no one watched. Small creatures trusted hands faster than grown wolves did. The 17th claimant stepped away. The 18th did not rise yet. A handler pulled Alara by her chain toward the offering table to receive a token loaf before the final inspection round. Protocol demanded she kneel and break bread to signify obedience to conclave law. She heard it then, almost swallowed by torch crackle and crowd noise. A faint, ragged whine under the platform. She froze. The handler yanked. Move. Another whine. Not loud, just frayed and weak, the sound of a throat that had cried too long. Alara twisted toward the source. Beneath the offering platform, where ash from old rites had gathered in a shallow drift, a wolf pup crouched between support stones. Its coat, once silver, was matted gray with soot. Ribs stood out stark beneath skin. One ear lay torn at the edge, not fresh, and its paws trembled as it tried to shrink from the light. Warriors nearest the platform noticed her staring and followed her gaze. "Temple vermin?" one said with a shrug. "Let it starve," answered another. "Bad omen to feed strays during treaty rites." The handler hissed at Alara. "Kneel now." She looked at the loaf in her bound hands, then at the pup licking ash from the stone, because there was nothing else. The world narrowed to a brutal simplicity that felt almost like relief. If she knelt, she would survive tonight and lose herself by degrees. If she moved, everything would detonate at once. But the choice was not abstract in that moment. It had fur, bones, shaking breath. She stepped off the marked line. The chain snapped taut. She kept walking. "Hold her!" shouted the herald. Alara braced, twisted her wrists against the iron until skin split again, and used the brief slack to crouch at the platform's edge. She tore the ceremonial loaf apart with clumsy fingers and pushed pieces through the gap. "Easy," she whispered, voice rough. "No one is taking this from you." The pup flinched from her hand, then sniffed, then lunged with desperate, clacking bites. Crumbs stuck to its muzzle. It swallowed too fast, coughed, and returned to eating as if afraid the food would vanish. Alara broke smaller pieces and held them still until it could take them without choking. Warmth from its breath touched her knuckles. Tears burned unexpectedly behind her eyes, less from pity than from recognition. She knew this hunger. She knew what it meant to be visible only as a problem. The arena erupted. "How dare she pollute the rite? Remove her! Whip her in the ring and begin again!" A goblet shattered somewhere above. The herald struck his staff repeatedly, voice cracking as he called for order. Rurik barreled down from the envoy tier, face mottled with fury. "You disgraceful fool!" he spat, grabbing her shoulder. "You were bought and paid for before you arrived." Alara rose, placing herself between him and the gap where the pup still ate. "Then ask for a refund." For one startled heartbeat, silence dropped around them. Then Rurik raised his hand to strike again, but another voice cut through the clamor from the highest central dais, low and carrying without effort. "Enough." Every head turned. Marcus Starfall descended the black steps of the warlord's platform with the controlled pace of someone accustomed to being obeyed. He wore no crown, only dark leather under a fur-edged cloak and a torque of moon iron at his throat. Yet the movement in the arena changed around him like water finding a new current. His presence did not feel loud, it felt decisive. Alara had heard his name in barracks whispers and market gossip, always followed by caution. Warlord of Starfall territories, cold in council, unbroken in war, never bonded, never merciful when challenged. He reached them and took Alara's wrist, ostensibly to drag her clear before the crowd descended into riot. The instant skin met skin, the world tilted. A violent pull seized behind her ribs, as if a hidden thread had been jerked tight from the center of her chest to his hand. Heat shot through her, sharp enough to steal breath. Marcus stopped as abruptly as she did. His fingers tightened once, involuntary, and she saw amber flood his irises until they burned like molten metal under stormlight. Gold runes blazed to life along his forearm beneath the leather wraps, old symbols waking in rapid sequence as if reading a name they had waited centuries to find. Panic crashed into a fierce, aching recognition she had no language for. Home, some raw part of her insisted, and she nearly recoiled from the word. She had no home. She had this arena, this chain, this trembling pup at her heel. Marcus's expression hardened into fury, but it was turned inward as much as outward. The nearest alphas surged to their feet, shouting accusations. Rurik reached again for Alara's arm. Instinct moved faster than thought. She twisted and covered the pup with her body. Marcus made a sound deep in his chest, not fully human. When he spoke, the single word came hoarse, shocked out of him rather than chosen. Mine. The arena went dead still, as if the stone itself were listening. Then noise crashed back all at once. Chairs scraped, voices rose in outrage. Steel hissed from sheaths around the lower ring, and Alara felt the crowd lean toward violence with the same hungry momentum it had brought to the bidding. Marcus did not release her wrist. He stepped forward instead, putting his body between her and the nearest tier, and lifted his free hand once in a command so sharp that his own guard moved before anyone else could. 6 Starfall sentinels dropped from the warlord dais and formed a wall around them, cloaks snapping dark against the torchlight. Their armor was unadorned, black leather reinforced with moon iron plates, no decorative silver, no jeweled clasps, only practical lines and scarred bracers from real fighting. None of them looked at Alara like merchandise. They looked at her as a problem their alpha had claimed responsibility for, which was somehow more frightening and less degrading at the same time. Rurik shoved forward, red-faced with fury. You cannot invoke possession on treaty property without council vote. Marcus's voice stayed even. Watch me. The herald tried to reassert control, staff striking stone in frantic rhythm. Warlord Starfall, stand down. The conclave has not ratified a transfer. Marcus turned his head just enough for the elder to see his face fully, and the old man faltered mid-breath. Invoke dispute protocol if you wish. Until adjudication, she enters Bloodlaw Sanctuary under my protection. A scarred alpha from the 3rd tier bared his teeth. For a stray feeder and a half-starved pup? For what I name mine, Marcus said. That word detonated more effectively than any battle cry. Half the arena shouted protest, half looked suddenly cautious. Alara barely heard any of it. Her pulse was pounding too hard in her ears, and the pull between her chest and his hand had not eased. It throbbed with every heartbeat, raw and luminous, like being stitched while awake. She swallowed. Do not call me that. His jaw flexed. For the first time since he touched her, uncertainty flickered across his face, quickly buried beneath command. Then stay alive long enough to argue with me. He released her wrist only to strip his cloak from his shoulders and drape it around her chains and torn dress in one efficient movement. The fur still held his warmth. That should not have mattered. It did. The pup crawled from under the platform, belly low, crumbs clinging to its whiskers. It pressed against Alara's ankle and trembled. A few nobles made disgusted noises. One laughed and muttered, "The tribute collects vermin now." Marcus looked down at the pup, then at Alara, and gave a brief nod toward the opening in his guard line. Bring it. She stared, certain she had misheard. His gaze sharpened. Now. By the time twilight bled violet across the upper arches, they were moving through the inner corridors beneath the arena, away from the roar of the conclave and into a maze of old stone that smelled of cold mineral and banked fire. Ilara's legs shook with each step. Adrenaline had carried her through the ring. Exhaustion was collecting its debt now in dizzy waves and stinging wrists. The pup staggered beside her, too stubborn to be carried for long, then leaned against her shin when it tired. One of the sentinels, a broad woman with silver braids threaded through her hair, silently passed Ilara a strip of dried venison from her belt pouch without asking permission. Ilara broke it and fed the pup in tiny pieces while they walked. No one spoke for several minutes. Boots echoed. Torches guttered in iron brackets carved with moon phases worn smooth by generations of hands. I am still chained. I am still surrounded. I am walking deeper into another Alpha's territory and calling it rescue because no one has struck me in the last 10 minutes. If I trust this, I am a fool. If I do not trust it, I may still die, only tired and suspicious and alone. Keep counting exits, keep counting breaths. One for the next step, one for the next corner, one for the pup against my ankle, one for the weight of his cloak over my shoulders. Do not mistake protection for kindness. Do not mistake desire for safety. But he fed no hunger in that arena except mine and the pup's, and when he said mine, it sounded less like ownership and more like terror. That is the part I do not understand, and not understanding can get me killed. The corridor opened onto a high bridge of black basalt that linked the conclave complex to the Starfall quarter built into the mountain's shoulder. Wind struck her face, clean and brutal after the smoky arena air. Below, dark pines climbed the ravine in dense ranks, and far beyond them, a fortress rose from the cliff in layered towers, slate roofs, and watchfires burning steady against the night. This was not temporary conclave lodging. This was a seat of power that had expected siege and winter and both at once. Ilara slowed despite herself. Starfall guards lined the bridge approach in 2 silent rows. Not one reached for her. Not one sneered at the pup. They struck closed fists to their chests as Marcus passed, then lowered their heads briefly to Ilara as well, a gesture too formal to be pity. She did not know what it meant, and confusion made her shoulders tense harder than fear had. At the gatehouse, Marcus paused, while wardens checked the inner locks. He did not look at her immediately. He seemed to be listening to some inner current she could not hear. When he finally met her gaze, amber had begun to thread through his irises again, subtle but unmistakable. "Do you feel it still?" he asked quietly. The honest answer escaped before caution could stop it. "Yes." A sharp inhale cut through the wind, controlled, not calm. He motioned to the sentinels. "No one enters the North Tower without my word. If council envoys arrive, they wait." The silver-braided sentinel nodded once. "Understood, my lord." Ilara hated that relief moved through her at the order. Private tower meant isolation. Isolation meant vulnerability. Yet the memory of 100 watching faces made the thought of any public chamber unbearable. Inside the fortress, warmth gathered in the stones, rising from hidden hearth channels. The halls were lit by low blue-white lamps set behind frosted quartz, softer than torch flame. She caught glimpses of Marcus's people as they passed intersections, healers carrying bundles of clean linen, youths in training leathers hauling water, older wolves with weathered faces and clear eyes. They stopped when they saw him, then looked at Ilara with frank curiosity that held no immediate cruelty. In Dark Hollow, curiosity had always been the prelude to ridicule. Here it felt like a ledger being opened, not yet judged. A physician stepped from an alcove as they reached a spiral stair. "You are bleeding through the wraps," he told Marcus, then noticed Ilara's wrists and split knuckles. "Both of you, then?" Marcus did not break stride. "North Tower." "I can tend her now." "No." The refusal came too fast, almost a growl. Marcus slowed a beat later, as if hearing himself from a distance, and corrected with visible effort. You will tend her when I am present. The physician bowed and retreated. They climbed. Each turn of the stair made the stone arena feel farther and the consequence of what had happened feel closer. At the top level, Marcus unlocked a heavy cedar door reinforced with moon iron bands. The chamber beyond held a hearth, a narrow writing table, a carved chest, and a bed piled with winter furs. Not lavish, defensible. Windows arched toward the ravine, glass thick enough to resist arrows. Ilara stepped inside and turned as he closed the door behind them. The latch thudded into place and panic flared hot in her throat. She set the pup down and lifted her bound hands between them like a challenge. Are you protecting me? She asked, or keeping what you claimed? He stood very still. In the lamplight, the runes on his forearms were no longer blazing, but faint lines still glimmered beneath his skin, as if embers waited there. Both truths can exist. That sounds like a cage with poetry around it. A brief, strained smile pulled at one corner of his mouth and vanished. Fair. The pup, having located a rug near the hearth, circled twice and collapsed into sleep with a tiny, exhausted huff. The softness of that sound cut through the room harder than any argument. Marcus watched the animal for a moment, then crossed to a sideboard, poured water into a basin, and knelt before Ilara without ceremony. She jerked back. What are you doing? Cleaning your hands. I can do it myself. With chains on? He lifted his gaze to hers, and the world narrowed again to that impossible line between them, taut and bright, and terrifyingly alive. This time she did not look away. Neither did he. Breath caught in both their throats at once, a mirrored hitch. Heat gathered behind her ribs, spread through her chest, and dropped in a fast spiral to her wrists, where his fingers hovered over raw skin. When he finally touched her, careful despite the size of his hands, a current ran through her so suddenly that her knees weakened. Not pain, recognition, hunger for something she had never been given and still did not know how to ask for. Amber overtook his eyes fully, molten at the center, dark at the rim. His pupils narrowed to predatory slits, then widened again as if he were fighting his own body for control. The gold runes along his arms ignited an answer, brighter than before, tracing old symbols up to his throat where they disappeared under his collar. Ilara, he said, and her name in his mouth sounded like a vow spoken over a battlefield. Look at me. She was already looking. She could not stop. Fear and longing collided so hard it left her shaking. She had spent years surviving by anticipating harm, by reading shifts in tone, door hinges, footsteps outside her room. Nothing in that training prepared her for this. A warlord kneeling at her feet with power spilling from his skin, asking for her attention like a man asking for water in drought. She wanted to run. She wanted to lean forward until the pull between them stopped hurting. I do not understand this, she whispered. Neither do I, he answered, voice rough. But I know what it is. The bond answered for him, tightening once more, undeniable as gravity. The locked line of their gaze held, and somewhere below the fear, the first fragile edge of trust began to form. The fragile edge held only because Marcus moved first, lowering his gaze to her torn knuckles as if power meant nothing beside damaged skin. He dipped a cloth into the basin, wrung it out, and said, "This will sting." Then he waited, hand suspended in the space between them, giving her a choice where no one else had. Ilara nodded once. He cleaned her hands with the patience of a field healer, not a warlord. Dirt and dried blood lifted in thin pink streams into the water. When the cloth touched the deepest split where chain links had rubbed her raw, she hissed through her teeth. His jaw tightened in answer, a flash of anger aimed at the injury, not at her. He rinsed the cloth, cleaned the second hand, then reached for the lock at her wrists. Iron clicked open. The sudden lightness nearly made her sway. She rubbed at the red grooves left behind and stared at him, suspicion snapping awake again. You took the chains off inside a locked room. That is either mercy or strategy. Both can still be true, he said. You could pick up that poker by the hearth and aim for my throat. I would not stop you unless you tried to kill yourself with it. She studied his face for mockery and found none. The runes on his arms had dimmed to ember lines beneath skin, but they flared brighter each time she stepped closer or his attention sharpened on her. The bond pulsed with it, a live wire drawn taut through her center. He seemed to feel every flicker too, his breathing never quite settled. The pup woke, nose twitching at the scent of water and wool. It dragged itself halfway up, legs unsteady, and gave a thin bark that was more demand than sound. Marcus turned from Alara at once, crossed to a small iron pot near the hearth, and poured in broth from a sealed jug. He crouched, set the pot over flame, and held his palm beneath it. Gold runes ignited over his wrist and forearm. Heat gathered fast, not wildfire but controlled warmth that brought the broth to steam within moments. Alara watched in wary disbelief. You are cooking for me. I am feeding what is under my protection, he replied, starting with the one who cannot argue. He poured broth into a shallow wooden bowl and placed it on the floor for the pup, then braced one hand beside it so the animal could lean against his wrist while it drank. The pup did exactly that, pressing close, without fear. Alara felt her throat tighten for reasons she refused to name. The same crowd that had called this creature vermin would have kicked it aside for staining ceremony ash. Marcus held still while it lapped, as careful as if it were made of blown glass. When the bowl emptied, he refilled it once, then brought a second cup to Alara. He did not hand it over immediately. Too fast will make you sick. Small swallows. The command should have irritated her. Instead, she obeyed. Warmth spread through her chest as broth touched an empty stomach. She sat on the edge of the bed because her knees had begun to tremble in earnest, and he moved the writing chair within reach so she could set the cup down between sips. The practical kindness of it disarmed her more than grand declarations could have. No speeches, no bargain, just an alpha king rearranging furniture so a souled woman did not spill. I expected interrogation, she said quietly. Names, trade routes, weak points in Dark Hollow walls. I already know Dark Hollow's weak points. Punishment, then. His gaze settled on her split knuckles. You have had enough of that from people who called it governance. The room grew still except for the pop of cedar in the hearth. Alara wrapped both hands around the cup for heat she could control. Marcus leaned back on his heels, large and contained, like a predator choosing not to close distance. Why restraint? She asked. In the arena you said mine before 100 alphas. A long pause followed, as if he were selecting words from a language he had not used in years. Because the bond struck like a blade through armor, and pain sounds like possession in men raised to command. I will not pretend that word was gentle. He met her eyes fully. I meant I would not surrender you to them. I did not mean I had earned you. The honesty landed harder than any oath. Inside her, thoughts skidded against each other. I have survived by treating every gift as a hook. I know the pattern. Kindness first, terms later, debt forever. He is dangerous in ways I still cannot map. He can end wars with a sentence. He can lock this door and call it sanctuary. Yet he asked before touching my wounds. He fed the pup first. He unlocked iron from my wrists with his own hands. If this is strategy, it is the strangest one I have ever seen, because it leaves me room to refuse him. I do not know what to do with room. I do not know where to put my fear when it has nothing immediate to bite. The bond keeps tugging, not like a chain, but like a compass needle finding north against my will, and I hate that my body answers him with relief. Marcus rose and crossed to the door. He checked the lock, then dragged a thick wool blanket from a chest and spread it against the cedar boards, directly in front of the threshold. Ilara frowned. There is a second room through that arch. I saw the door. I know. You expect me to sleep while you stand guard all night? I expect to be where anyone must cross to reach you. She set down the empty cup. And if the danger is you? His expression did not flicker. Then this is where I hold my line. He stripped off his cloak and laid it over the foot of the bed, a dark weight of fur and leather that still smelled of mountain wind. Then he shifted. The transformation rolled through him without spectacle, muscle and bone realigning in a controlled cascade that made the lamp glass hum. In heartbeats, an enormous black wolf occupied the space by the door, shoulders nearly level with the latch, amber eyes alert in the dim light. Not monstrous, vigilant. He circled once atop the blanket and lowered himself with his back to the wood, effectively sealing the entrance. Ilara had seen wolves used as threat her whole life. This looked like a promise. She slept in bursts, waking to each crackle from the hearth and each distant footstep in the tower corridor. Every time she opened her eyes, he was there, head lifted, tracking sound. Once, deep in the night, nightmare dragged her into the arena again, into hands and laughter and ash. She jolted upright with a strangled breath. The wolf rose instantly and approached 2 careful paces, then stopped, waiting for permission. She nodded, barely. He came close enough for her to touch his ruff. Warmth and solid weight steadied her pulse. When her breathing slowed, he retreated to the door without a sound. By the time pale light began to thread the window arches, Ilara had drifted into a deeper sleep curled on her side. She woke to unfamiliar comfort, the fur cloak tucked around her shoulders, edges pinned so drafts could not slip in. At the foot of the bed, the pup snored softly with a full belly. At the door, Marcus was back in human form, seated against the wood, one arm braced across drawn knees. His eyes were closed, but at the shift of her blanket they opened at once and fixed on her chest, counting the rise and fall before he seemed to remember himself. He had been checking that all night. A knock sounded below, then quick steps on the stair. The silver-braided sentinel entered when Marcus called permission, expression grave. "Council has convened early," she said. "Envoys from 8 houses demand appearance. Dark Hollow sent formal complaint, requesting disciplinary spectacle to restore right order." Ilara felt old cold flood her limbs. Marcus stood. Name: Commander Varric of Temple Enforcement leads the demand. Marcus's gaze turned flint hard. "Prepare the lower chamber. Bring the pup to the infirmary kitchen and keep it fed." The sentinel hesitated, glancing at Ilara. "Will she stand with your household or apart?" Marcus answered without looking away from Ilara. "At my right." The words should have felt like another claim. Instead, they sounded like a line drawn in public stone. By mid-morning, the council chamber thrummed with contained hostility. The room had been carved from mountain bedrock, circular like the arena but roofed and shadowed, with narrow skylights casting cold bars of light across the floor. 100 sigils ringed the walls in hammered bronze. Today, nearly half were occupied by cloaked envoys or their alphas, all speaking in clipped bursts that died when Marcus entered. Ilara walked beside him, pulse loud, chin level because she refused to give them the tremor in her hands. She wore a plain dark gown borrowed from Starfall stores and the same fur cloak from the night. Her healing knuckles ached with each heartbeat. Across the room, Rurik stood with Dark Hollow's delegation, face rigid with vindicated anger. The presiding elder raised his staff. Proceeding: contamination of conclave rite, disruption of treaty protocol, defiance of ceremonial command. Petitioners request corporal punishment of subject Ilara Darkhollow and nullification of disputed sanctuary. Murmurs of approval rippled through the seats. Rurik stepped forward first. She has always been unstable. Darkhollow disavows her actions and accepts corrective sentence. Alara did not look at him. Looking would cost her too much. Commander Varric, broad and iron gray at the temples, strode into the open ring with temple enforcers behind him. His voice carried like a training whip. Tradition bends once, it breaks forever. A public whipping restores precedent. 20 lashes at dusk, witnessed by all signatory pacts. The chamber waited for Marcus. He said nothing. The silence stretched long enough for dread to crawl up Alara's spine. He stood unreadable, hands clasped behind his back, gaze on the carved floor as though weighing numbers no one else could see. Around them, confidence returned to hostile faces. One envoy smirked. Another nodded toward Varric as if outcome were settled. Varric took 2 steps toward Alara. Kneel and receive judgment. She held her ground. He reached for her throat to force her down. Marcus moved with terrifying precision. One heartbeat he was still. The next he had seized Varric's wrist and driven him to the stone with a crack that echoed off bronze sigils. Claws burst from Marcus's right hand, black and curved, pinning Varric's sleeve to the floor a finger's width from flesh. Amber blazed through Marcus's eyes. Predator and king fused into one presence that made seasoned alphas recoil. "No hand touches her," he said, voice low and carrying to every seat. "Any hand raised against Alara rises against the alpha throne." Varric strained and froze as Marcus's claws sank deeper into stone. Enforcers half drew blades, then stopped when Starfall sentinels flooded the ring from side doors, formation perfect, weapons level. Marcus released Varric's wrist only to stand and extend his left arm toward Alara without turning. "Come." She stepped into place at his right side, where power in this chamber had always seated equals, never tribute. A stunned hush followed, then scattered protests. The presiding elder stammered, "Warlord Starfall, you overreach." Marcus faced the council, runes igniting up both forearms in luminous bands. "I invoke Blood Law Sanctuary under Sovereign Seal. Dispute it through dual code or leave this chamber. While Sanctuary stands, she is under my name, my law, and my blade." A rival alpha rose, snarling. "You would fracture a century of order for one female who fed a stray?" Marcus's answer cut clean. "I would fracture any order that requires starving the small and beating the defenseless to feel sacred." No one spoke for a breath, then another. One by one, envoys measured risk against pride. Several stood and left in visible disgust, but those who stayed did so under law, and law demanded acknowledgement. The elder bowed first, shallow and furious. 3 alphas followed. More came in uneven sequence until the chamber held a ragged curve of bent heads and rigid shoulders. Rurik remained upright. Marcus turned just enough for the room to witness the warning in his profile. "Darkhollow envoy, choose." Rurik's mouth thinned. He bowed barely, hatred burning like acid in his eyes. Alara felt the moment settle into history with a weight she could almost touch. Protection offered in private could be mistaken for appetite, strategy, or secrecy. Protection offered here, before enemies and allies, cost rank, alliances, and blood. Marcus had paid anyway. As the council dispersed into hard whispers and retreating cloaks, he glanced sideways at her, the feral blaze in his eyes dimming to human amber. "Are you hurt?" "No," she said. Then, because truth mattered now in a new and frightening way, "only shaken." His shoulders eased a fraction. "That makes 2 of us." For the first time since chains closed around her wrists at Darkhollow's gate, Alara let herself believe she might stand beside power without being consumed by it, and when Marcus guided her toward the chamber doors, she did not pull her hand away. She kept her hand in his as they crossed the chamber threshold, and that single fact seemed to trouble half the fortress more than the threat of open conclave fracture. Conversations halted when they passed. Servants and soldiers stepped aside. Some bowed, some only watched, calculating. Alara felt each gaze like weather moving over skin, cold fronts of resentment meeting pockets of wary respect. At the bend where the council corridor opened toward the inner court, a man in pale ceremonial robes waited with 6 attendants carrying moon lanterns of hammered silver. He was tall, striking rather than handsome, with a preacher's stillness and a smile that never reached his eyes. Marcus stopped so abruptly their joined hands tightened. "Raven Silvermane," he said. The man inclined his head with graceful precision. "Warlord Starfall, Lady Alara." His tone made her title sound like a liturgical test. "I came to offer prayer after such turbulence. The conclave bleeds trust. We must stitch it quickly, or wolves will tear wolves by winter." Alara recognized him now from whispers in dark hollow kitchens and market rumors traded over grain sacks. Reformer, temple speaker, a man who could turn fear into doctrine and call it cleansing. He had gathered followers across border pacts by promising purity, discipline, and release from alpha coercion. She had once wondered whether that made him brave. Standing under his attention, she understood the darker architecture beneath the rhetoric. He looked at her the way traders assessed fault lines in stone. Marcus did not release her hand. "You came to my hall without summons." Raven's smile widened by a fraction. Spiritual authority often arrives where political authority hesitates. The silver-braided sentinel stepped out from the wall line, one hand resting on her sword hilt. "State your purpose clearly." Raven lifted a leather cord from his sleeve, a small disc of compacted gray ash hanging from it, etched with crescent marks. "The packs are frightened. Symbols calm frightened wolves. We distribute these to remind them instinct can be governed by sacred will, not mere blood impulse. I would place one in Lady Alara's keeping as a sign she respects temple balance." Alara felt Marcus's grip harden. His gaze fixed on the ash disk, and for the first time since the council confrontation, unease moved through him like a visible current. "No," Marcus said. "Take your trinket and go." Raven turned to Alara, and his voice softened into practiced compassion. "You fed a starving pup while kings watched. Tenderness like that could lead our people into a gentler age, or into ruin if misused by men who crave thrones. Walk carefully, child. The crowd that cheers your mercy today may kneel to your chains tomorrow." "I am not a child," Alara answered. "Then hear an adult truth." Raven tucked the talisman away. "Prophecy-born bonds have ended nations before. When one mating thread dominates the network, freedom becomes theater. I intend to prevent that ending." His attendants shifted, lantern light flashing across ash-marked cords at their throats. As they withdrew, Alara saw identical cords tied around the wrists of 2 temple guards at the far arch, guards who had served the conclave for years. Their faces were blank, attentive, calm in a way that did not look natural. Marcus saw it too. By the second bell after noon, the fortress had received 3 contradictory proclamations from the conclave scribes, all echoing Raven's phrasing: preserve wolf freedom, resist tainted bloodline monarchy, reject bond tyranny. The words spread faster than orders from seated alphas, copied onto parchment and posted in barracks and kitchens by eager hands. In the North Tower, Alara stood at the window while the pup, stabilized in the infirmary kitchen and returned under sentinel escort before dusk, slept under the desk, belly round at last, and listened to distant chanting rise from the lower court. Not her name, not yet, but close. Marcus entered carrying a tray himself. Bread, broth, sliced pear, and set it on the table before crossing to the hearth. He moved with restrained force, each gesture clipped. "I sent the silver-braided captain to seize every ash talisman inside Starfall quarters, and question anyone distributing them. I also sent formal protests to the presiding elder demanding temple inventories. Ilara turned from the window. Will he answer? He already did. A humorless curve touched Marcus's mouth. The elder claims the talismans are devotional, harmless, and outside military concern. She folded her arms to still a tremor she did not want him to see. So Raven speaks as priest and organizes as strategist. He speaks as a man preparing a battlefield where language is the first weapon. The pull between them throbbed at close range, stronger in private than in crowded rooms. It had texture now. Not a single shock, but layered sensations. Warmth under her sternum when he entered. Sharper pressure when he was angry. Steadying calm when he met her gaze and let silence carry what words could not. It frightened her because it felt mutual, and mutual things could be torn away. I stand in a tower belonging to the most feared alpha in the conclave, and I want to believe him when he says protection instead of possession. I want to believe my life can bend towards shelter without demanding payment in pieces of myself. The bond keeps pulling, not asking permission, and I keep bracing as if impact is inevitable. If I step closer, I could vanish into his power. If I step back, I return to the old cold where no one sees me unless they need my body for leverage. I am so tired of choosing between harm and hunger. I am tired of survival that tastes like ash. He watches me as if my breathing matters, and that is either salvation or the most refined trap I have ever met. Marcus came to stand beside her, close enough that heat from his body reached her hands. You are spiraling. She gave a short, almost embarrassed laugh. That obvious? To me. He paused. Ilara, I cannot sever what formed in the arena. I can choose what I do with it. So can you. She studied his profile, hard lines softened by window light. Tell me what you are afraid of. A long silence followed. Centuries ago, my father used bond law as a crown hammer. He called obedience sacred. Pax bled for it. I ended his line with my own hands and swore never to wear that shape of rule. He turned to her fully. Raven is dangerous because he tells one true story, then builds 10 lies around it. Yes, bonds can be abused. No, yours is not a chain he gets to cut by force. A knock sounded. The silver-braided sentinel entered, dust on her boots, jaw tight. Report, she said. We confiscated 23 ash talismans from Starfall Barracks and Infirmary. Wolves wearing them showed dampened scent response and delayed shift reflex. 2 admitted Raven's preachers told them the talismans protect against compelled mating influence. Also, Temple Guard rotations changed without council notice. Night Watch at the Moonright grounds is now majority Silvermane volunteers. Marcus's expression went cold enough to frost the room. Any direct link to coercion? The sentinel placed a wrapped object on the table and unfolded cloth to reveal a broken talisman. Fine runes, nearly invisible, circled the ash disk. Our runesmith read this as suppression script keyed to pack instinct channels, not lethal, controlling. Ilara stared at the carved lines and remembered the blank gaze of the guards in the corridor. A doctrine that called compassion weakness was one thing. A mechanism that blunted wolves into compliance was another. Where is the runesmith now? Marcus asked. Secured in lower archive with 3 witnesses and full notes copied. I have also posted loyal guards at the right approach. Good. Marcus dismissed her with a nod, then looked at Ilara. We are done waiting for Raven to overstep. I will challenge him publicly at dusk during rite preparation. Publicly is where he wants this, Ilara said. Crowds make his words contagious. Then we give the crowd facts before he gives them fire. 3 hours later, dusk gathered blue over the temple district, and the Moonright approach blazed with braziers, prayer ribbons, and packed bodies. Wolves from a dozen territories filled the steps, some in ceremonial furs, some armored, many wearing ash cords openly now, as if affiliation had become identity overnight. The sacred arch loomed ahead, carved with crescent wolves and old oaths, the same stone line where treaty rights began and reputations died. Marcus walked at Alara's side in full Starfall war leathers, no crown, no pageantry, only authority stripped to essentials. The pup trotted just behind Alara's heel, coat cleaner, stride stronger, ears pricked. Murmurs rolled through the crowd at the sight of it. Raven stood on the temple dais, arms spread in welcome. Warlord, lady, you honor the right. Marcus did not bow. We found suppression runes in your talismans. A ripple passed through the onlookers. Raven's expression remained serene. We found panic in your barracks. My talismans soothe panic. You replace temple guard rotations with your own loyalists. Volunteers serving the goddess. You are organizing enthrallment and calling it devotion. Raven lowered his hands, voice rising to carry. What I organize is freedom from alpha domination disguised as fated destiny. Ask yourselves, wolves of the conclave, who benefits when one warlord names a female before witness and claims sanctuary beyond review? Who profits when ancient mate myths return exactly when a throne can be centralized? Murmurs hardened. Several alphas in the crowd exchanged loaded looks. Alara felt pressure building from all sides, not physical yet, but social force sharpening into a blade edge. Raven stepped down one stair, fixing his gaze on her. Lady Alara, answer plainly. Did you choose this bond in full freedom, or were you seized by warlord right before 100 houses? The question was crafted to trap any answer. If she defended Marcus, she looked enthralled. If she denounced him, she fed Raven's crusade. I chose to feed the starving when your council watched, she said, voice clear. I choose my words now. Do not borrow my mercy to build your fear. A few wolves shouted assent. More shouted over them. Raven lifted one hand, and the noise dipped as if pulled by string. Then choose again tonight, he said, at the prophecy stone, publicly, free of warlord influence. Marcus stepped forward. No. Raven smiled with open pity. You hear that? Freedom denied by the very man who says he protects. The first explosion was not fire but sound, a deep pulse from beneath the temple floor. Runes along the dais flared sickly gray. Wolves wearing ash talismans stiffened in unison, eyes unfocusing, then moved as one body toward pre-marked positions around the right circle. Temple doors slammed, moon iron gates dropped over side exits with thunderous finality. Now, Raven said quietly. Hidden chains of etched metal shot upward from slots in the stone and snapped around Marcus's wrists, ankles, and throat before his guard could reach him. The cage geometry sealed in a heartbeat, forming a lattice of rune bars that fed on the surge of his alpha power. Each struggle made the sigils burn brighter. Starfall sentinels drew steel, but half the surrounding guards turned on them with synchronized precision, talismans pulsing dull ash at their throats. Alara lunged toward Marcus. Two zealots caught her arms. She drove an elbow into one and tore free for half a step before another line of followers closed. The pup launched from behind her, teeth bared, fastening on a cultist's bracer long enough to break his grip. Someone kicked toward it. Alara spun, shielding the animal with her body, and felt a blade tip kiss the fabric at her side without breaking skin. Marcus hit the cage bars with both hands, roar ripping through the temple court. Ilara! Raven approached through smoke from newly lit ritual braziers, calm amid chaos, a ceremonial blade gleaming in his hand. Do not waste strength, warlord. This prison drinks alpha force. You will stay alive long enough to witness correction. He stopped before Ilara, and for the first time his composure showed strain, hunger, and zeal knotted together. Bring her to the prophecy stone. If she yields quietly, he breathes until moonset. If she resists, the bond dies screaming and civil war begins before dawn. The zealots tightened their ring. Behind them, wolves shouted, fought, hesitated, torn between instinct and suppression. The temple bells began to toll, one heavy strike after another, and Alara watched Marcus trapped inside a cage built to consume him, while Raven's followers dragged her toward the center of the rite. The zealots tightened their hold as they dragged her across the rune-cut floor, boots grinding ash into the carved lines until the prophecy stone at the center came into full view, veined white and gray like frozen lightning trapped in rock. Heat from the ritual pyres pressed against her face. Smoke stung her eyes. Around the circle, wolves wearing ash cords stood too straight, too still, mouths parted as if breathing someone else's command. Marcus slammed both palms against the cage again, and the bars answered by flaring brighter, siphoning strength in visible pulses that ran from his skin into the metal lattice. His shoulders shook with contained force, but each effort only fed the prison. Starfall sentinels fought at the outer ring, outnumbered and boxed by enthralled temple guards. Steel struck steel in sharp bursts. No one could break through quickly enough. Raven mounted the first step of the prophecy dais and spread his arms to the crowd, voice amplified by the stone acoustics until it seemed to come from every wall at once. Witness Mercy's true mask. The conclave was invited to kneel to sentiment, then to bond, then to throne. Tonight we cut that thread before it collars every pack. A murmur ran through the uncertain ranks, fear mixing with obedience. Several alphas who had mocked Alara in the arena now stood trapped along the perimeter gates, fury in their faces and no command over their own warriors wearing ash talismans. Raven had not come for one throne. He had come for all of them. He turned and looked at Alara with formal regret, like a priest preparing a sacrifice he had rehearsed in private. If you cooperate, Warlord Starfall lives through Moonrise. If you resist, his death opens the rite. She planted her feet, making the zealots drag dead weight for 2 steps before one struck the back of her knee and forced her down. The pup sprang at that man with a raw snarl, fast and fearless now, and caught his sleeve long enough to tear him off balance. Another guard kicked toward the animal and missed when Alara twisted, taking the blow on her own shin instead. Pain shot up her leg. She did not cry out. Raven descended until they were level, blade angled down in his hand. The metal was ritual silver, etched with ash scripts matching the talismans. Your kindness gave me the symbol I needed, he said quietly, so only she and Marcus could hear. Pax adores stories. The girl who fed a starving pup, the saint of softness. When she dies on this stone, softness dies with her. Marcus's voice came ragged from behind the bars. Alara, do not give him offered blood. Raven glanced over his shoulder and smiled. He still thinks this is about blood volume. It is about consent theater. They must see her yield. Alara lifted her head toward Marcus. His face had gone pale beneath war paint shadows, and a thin line of blood marked where the cage collar had cut at his throat when he surged. Yet his gaze stayed on her, steady despite pain, and she felt the bond thread between them, taut and hot, refusing to break. I can smell fear, ash, and hot iron. I can hear men I do not know shouting my name as either warning or accusation. I can feel his pulse through a bond no one asked my permission to make, and still it is the truest thing in this ring. Raven wants surrender performed as holiness. He wants me still, quiet, symbolic. If I wait for rescue, Marcus feeds that cage until there is nothing left to save. If I comply, I become the proof of his doctrine forever. So this is the choice. Not survival at any cost. Direction. I choose the direction. She looked back at Raven and held his gaze. You keep saying freedom. You mean control. I mean order without tyrant mating lines. You drugged instincts and called it prayer. I disciplined panic. You starved wolves and called it purity. His expression sharpened. Enough. Bind her hands to the stone. The zealot seized her wrists and stretched her arms over the prophecy slab. By the time the third temple bell tolled, smoke had turned the moon above the broken roofline into a blurred silver coin. Raven raised the blade and began the invocation in Old Temple tongue, each phrase answered by a synchronized pulse from the ash talismans around the ring. Alara waited for the downstroke. At the final word, she surged forward instead of away, catching Raven's knife wrist with both hands and driving the edge across her own palm in one hard pull. Pain flared bright and immediate. Before anyone could wrench her back, she slammed that bleeding hand flat against the prophecy stone and spoke into the roar. Not offered, chosen. The stone answered. A silver-white current erupted from beneath her palm, racing through every carved channel in the dais, then exploding outward in branching arcs that leapt from rune to rune across the entire temple floor. Ash talismans cracked in unison with a sound like ice splitting on a river. Cords snapped. Gray discs shattered into powder. Wolves who had stood blank-eyed staggered as scent and instinct crashed back into them, confusion turning to outrage in heartbeat waves. Raven stumbled backward, invocation broken. "Hold formation!" he shouted. "Hold!" No one held. Temple guards blinked, looked down at broken talismans in their fists, then at the blades they had raised against their own allies. Several dropped weapons outright. Others turned on Raven's inner circle. The outer gates, no longer reinforced by synchronized script, buckled under a coordinated strike from freed sentinels and furious alphas. The current did not stop at the crowd. It found the cage. The bond line between Alara and Marcus flared visible for one blinding instant. A gold thread shot through with white fire, and the cage runes inverted. Instead of drinking alpha power, the bars flooded from the prophecy surge. Metal glowed orange, then white, then sagged. Marcus hit the weakening lattice with a shoulder and tore through as the structure melted apart around him. Raven saw him free and lunged for Alara with the ritual blade, panic stripping the preacher's poise at last. If she dies now, the rite still seals. He moved fast, but Alara met him. She caught his wrist again, this time higher, locking both hands over the carved runes branded into his forearm. The awakened current answered touch like command. Light poured through her grip into his scripts, overloading every sigil he had used to enthrall others. Raven screamed and tried to wrench free. The blade clattered from numb fingers. Marcus reached her flank in 2 strides, claws half-formed, amber threaded through his irises. Every instinct in him aimed at finishing the threat. He stopped because she did not yield space. "Let me end him," he said, breath rough. "No." Alara's voice carried farther than she expected, steady despite the shaking in her arms. "He ends where everyone can see." Raven dropped to one knee under the current, smoke lifting from the ash marks at his throat and wrists as they burned out in strips of dull black that crumbled away. He looked up at her, hatred naked now that charisma had failed. "Blood like yours should never rule," he spat. Alara stepped closer until he had to focus on her, not the crowd, not the chaos he had scripted. "It will not rule by fear again." She pressed her wounded palm to the floor beside him and called the same current through the temple's older oath lines, the ones Raven had tried to overwrite. Silver chains of pack magic rose from the carved grooves, coiling around his wrists, chest, and knees before locking with a ringing snap. He pitched forward, pinned upright and helpless, forced to face the ring of wolves he had manipulated. The pup trotted through settling smoke and stopped directly in front of Raven, hackles lifted, a low warning rolling from its chest. Not starving now. Not silent. One by one, voices in the crowd shifted from confusion to witness statements, then accusation. "He marked my guards. He gave talismans to our healers. He replaced Moonwatch with zealots." The narrative he had controlled dissolved under collective memory returning in real time. Marcus straightened at Alara's side, still keyed for battle but no longer eclipsing her. When he spoke, command settled over the chamber with practiced finality. Raven Silvermane, by conclave law and blood law precedent, you are stripped of spiritual office, pack rank, and right authority. You are convicted before witness of coercive enthrallment, treason against allied houses, and attempted unlawful sacrifice. Raven laughed once, breathless and bitter. You think prison ends doctrine? Marcus's gaze remained cold. No. Truth does, he signaled. Starfall wardens advanced with moon iron restraints etched to block ritual channeling. They layered the restraints over Alara's silver bindings, locking each clasp in full view of the assembled packs. No hidden transfer, no quiet execution. Law on stone. Alara did not move until the final shackle clicked shut, and Raven's remaining cult sigils flickered, then went dark across his skin like extinguished embers. Take him to the abyss vault beneath this temple, Marcus ordered. Record every charge, every witness signs. The wardens hauled Raven to his feet and dragged him toward the lower stair gate built into the dais wall, a narrow arch of black iron rarely opened except for oathbreakers. As it creaked wide, cold air rose from below, mineral and ancient. Raven twisted once, searching the crowd for believers. Few met his eyes. Those who did looked away first. When the gate slammed behind him and the locking bars dropped into place, the temple did not erupt in triumph. It exhaled, long and unsteady, like a body released from a held wound. Alara stood at the prophecy stone with blood drying on her palm, the pup pressed against her ankle, and Marcus at her flank, while 100 alpha houses watched the old order crack in plain sight. The presiding elder arrived breathless from the upper terrace, robes askew, 2 scribes and 3 wardens close behind. He took one look at the shattered ash discs littering the floor and seemed to age a decade in a single inhale. "Seal the chamber," he ordered. "No witness leaves unsigned." His gaze found Marcus, then Alara. "Bring the evidence table." The silver-braided captain moved immediately. She laid out everything in front of the gathered alphas. The broken talisman from the archive cloth, 23 confiscated cords tagged by barracks location, and the runesmith's copied notes, each page sealed with 3 witness stamps exactly as Marcus had ordered. The runesmith himself, ink still on his fingers, read the suppression script aloud in a clear voice. No mysticism, no rhetoric. Technical lines keyed to instinct channels and obedience triggers. Murmurs turned to curses. Commander Varric stepped into the open ring, his earlier certainty gone. He removed his temple insignia and set it on the stone. "I saw the rotation changes and called them administrative," he said, voice rough. "I let fear of disorder outweigh duty. Record my failure in full." "Recorded," the elder said. Rurik tried to slip toward the outer arch with Darkhollow's remaining delegation, but 3 wardens blocked him. Alara watched him square his shoulders and attempt indignation one last time. "Darkhollow acted within treaty right. We submitted lawful tribute. Raven's conspiracy is not ours." Alara met his stare until he looked at her. Truly looked. Not at a resource, but at a witness who had survived him. "You called me unstable in council so they would not question your bargain. You asked for honorable placement and meant profitable disposal. Say that with the same voice." Rurik's mouth worked. No words came. The elder lifted his staff. "Darkhollow tribute clause is nullified as coerced practice pending full conclave vote at dawn. Envoy Rurik is stripped of speaking rank and held for treaty fraud inquiry." He turned to the scribes. "Include every confiscated item and every statement, nothing sealed." That line settled another thread Alara had carried like a thorn. Nothing sealed. No private burial of truth. When the witness tablets were pressed and the final signature taken, moonlight had climbed high enough to pour through the broken temple roof in one unbroken shaft. The crowd thinned toward the courtyard, not in riot now, but in stunned, deliberate silence. Marcus touched Alara's uninjured hand. "Come with me." He led her beneath the same stone arch where she had first been dragged in chains for auction. The carvings above them, wolves in pursuit and wolves in defense, looked different now that no one held her wrists. The pup settled nearby on the warm step, ears flicking, exhausted but alert, as if it understood this threshold mattered. Marcus stopped facing her. He had washed Raven's ash from his arms, but scorch lines from the cage still marked his skin. His voice, when it came, held no command, only stripped honesty. "Choose me with a free heart, Alara." The bond between them thrummed, deep and steady, waiting without forcing. She felt every bruise, every fear that had taught her to expect a hidden cost, and every choice she had made anyway. She took his hand and lifted it to the side of her throat, then bared the junction of neck and shoulder. "I choose," she said, "but hear me clearly. Not owned, not traded, partnered." His eyes darkened with emotion so fierce it almost looked like pain. "Partnered." She stepped closer until his breath warmed her skin. "Say it." "Mine," he whispered, but the word shook. A question, not a claim. Alara touched her forehead to his. "Yours. If you are mine." His hands framed her face with reverence that made her chest ache. "I am yours." "Then mark me, mate." His fangs lengthened, a swift flash of white at the edge of moonlight. He paused one last heartbeat, waiting. She answered by angling her throat farther, pulse racing beneath his mouth. The bite landed sharp and bright, pain flaring through her shoulder in a clean arc that stole her breath. For an instant the world narrowed to pressure, heat, and the sound of her own heartbeat hammering in her ears. Then sensation transformed. Warmth surged from the bite through every nerve, not numbing pain but transmuting it, like iron plunged into a forge and coming out luminous. Starlight seemed to pour under her skin. Gold runes ignited along Marcus's arms and, in answer, silver lines bloomed over Alara's collarbone and down her wrists, mirroring his patterns as if two halves of one language had finally found each other. The bond thread flared visible between them, molten gold braided with white, then sank inward, settling beneath skin and bone. Marcus released her slowly, lips brushing the mark with something close to awe. His voice broke on the last word. "Mate." Alara swayed, not from weakness but from the force of clarity rushing through the completed bond. She felt his relief, his restraint, his old grief where a father had weaponized sacred law, and beneath it all a devotion so steady it frightened and steadied her at once. She placed her palm over his heart through torn leather. "Your turn," she said. He bared his shoulder above the heartmark scar, tilting his head in silent offering. She saw the vulnerability in it, a warlord exposing the one place he could not armor. Alara let her own fangs descend, gathered him with both arms, and bit. His breath punched out in a rough sound against her hair. Muscles went taut under her hands, then softened as the mark took. Heat flooded back through her, this time with his pulse braided into hers, a two-beat rhythm locking into one cadence. She tasted salt, cedar smoke, and the wild, clean note that was uniquely Marcus. When she withdrew, silver and gold light chased across his chest and hers, then settled into twin marks that gleamed once and cooled. "Mine," she whispered into his skin. He cupped the back of her neck, eyes bright with unguarded tenderness. "Yours." They said the final word together. "Mate." Forehead to forehead, breath mingling, they spoke the vow once, then again, each repetition remaking the first. "I see you, I choose you, I keep you." The second time, the arch itself seemed to hold the sound and return it softer. Marcus wrapped both arms around her and simply held on. Alara let herself be held, not as captive, not as symbol, but as chosen equal with bite marks that answered each other. The pup gave a single approving chuff and curled against their boots, as if claiming its place in the circle. At first light, they entered the conclave great room together for the covenant vote. No chains, no handlers. Ilara wore dark wool and moon silver at her throat, her new mark visible above the collar. Marcus walked half a step beside her, not ahead. The hall was full, all 100 standards rehung, and every alpha house represented either by ruler or sworn proxy. On the central table lay the same physical evidence from the night before, now indexed and copied. Broken talisman, seized cords, runesmith annotations, witness tablets. Nothing vanished into convenient fire. The elder read the new law in a voice that shook only once. Tribute practices were abolished in all signatory territories. Any bond claim without explicit consent became a punishable offense under blood law. Ash script talismans were outlawed. Possession triggered immediate tribunal review. Each pack would send guardians, healers, and winter stores to a shared sanctuary for abandoned wolves and orphaned children on neutral ground under joint oversight. Then he lifted the moon-forged circlet. Ilara Darkhollow, by witness and vow, do you accept office as High Luna of Starfall Territories and Covenant co-sovereign of this conclave accord? She looked across the hall. Rurik's seat stood empty, his Darkhollow badge removed after his recorded confession at dawn to falsifying treaty scarcity reports. Commander Varric knelt unarmed among the temple delegation, awaiting assignment to Sanctuary Watch as penance. The rival Alpha who had mocked muzzles met her gaze and bowed first, shame plain on his face. The loaded looks from corridors and council had reached their outcome, not all redeemed, but all named. Ilara faced the elder again. I accept under one condition. No wolf, child, or outsider is ever traded through these halls again. Not in famine, not in war, not under any holy word. Entered, the elder said. 100 alphas knelt. The circlet settled onto her hair, cool and startlingly light for something that changed so much. Marcus bowed his head to her before anyone else could, then rose and offered his hand. She took it, and together they turned toward the open doors where winter's sun struck the courtyard stones. By mid-morning, they stood at the sanctuary gate in the lower valley, while builders, healers, and pack guardians unloaded timber, blankets, medicine chests, and sacks of grain. Children chased each other between fresh fence posts, laughing in the brittle cold. Wolves too thin from border skirmishes were led gently toward warming pens and clean water troughs. The pup, now wearing a simple leather collar stamped with the sanctuary sigil, trotted the perimeter with grave importance, pausing to sit beside any newcomer who trembled. Ilara crouched to scratch behind its repaired ear. First guardian, she murmured. Marcus knelt beside her, shoulder brushing hers, and the bond answered with a calm pulse that felt like home, built in real time rather than inherited myth. And you, he said softly, are the reason this exists. She rose, still holding his hand, and watched the valley fill with work, noise, and the unglamorous architecture of peace. No one knelt to fear here. No one went hungry while others watched. Under a clear winter sky, with her mate at her side and a covenant written into law, Ilara stepped through the gate into the life they had chosen and kept.